G'day mates, it's B-Buster here, and I would like to give Best Fiends a big shout out for sponsoring this episode. So, you guys probably know by now that I'm a big fan of Best Fiends, and as you guys also probably know, true crime and horror is another one of my passions. But even I need the occasional break. So, when I feel like I need a bit of a mental palate cleanser, especially during the holiday season when I want to put my feet up, my go-to refresher is Best Fiends. With Best Fiends, you play through an actual storyline, which helps with that satisfying feeling of progression. It's also an awesome brain-boosting puzzle game that is great for downtime, and Best Fiends is now my go-to game at night when I'm chilling in bed and can't sleep. And not to brag or anything, but I'm over 1,000 levels in now and I still can't put the game down. In fact, 30 minutes can feel a lot like 30 seconds with how much fun I'm having. I also really love that I can play it literally anywhere that I want without having to worry about using data or finding Wi-Fi. So even when I don't have internet for whatever reason, I still have a fresh challenge waiting for me to give me that mental pick-me-up. Download Best Fiends free today on the App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends. So, this encounter happened this afternoon. I'm still very shaken about all of this and cannot get it out of my mind, so bear with me. My day started as it normally does. Early morning work shift, come home, drive my partner to work, come home to nap. However, when I got home, my partner texted me saying to pick them back up because apparently they just got news that they were laid off for the winter due to a very slow season. I went back, came back and went for my nap while my partner went to play video games. I was in a pretty deep sleep with my favorite TV show playing as background that I've seen a million times. About 2 hours or so later, I'm woken up to my creaky front door being opened, followed by a deep and unfamiliar hello. I listened intently as I thought that it could be my partner's friend who often stops by. I didn't hear anything further, so I shrugged it off to my TV and tried to go back to sleep. Shortly after that, I hear my partner open their bedroom door. I hear them yell, "Who the heck are you and why are you in my house?" I panic as I don't know who they're talking to, but I listen to the short interaction. And an older man, very startled by my partner's presence, explains that he had watched a package be delivered and after no one came to get the package right away, he decided to come inside. The package was still on the porch afterward, by the way. My partner tells this stranger, who had been walking directly towards my bedroom, to leave and that they were calling the police. But the man sort of lingers, stalling my partner, and asks if he can use our bathroom. He says, "No, get out," and the man slowly makes his way out and drives away. We called the police immediately after he left, giving him his and his vehicle's description. I called my neighbor to let them know and keep an eye out, and he informed me that when he came home 2 to 3 hours earlier, that vehicle was parked at the end of our street, and when he drove by, the man actually covered his face. I can't stop thinking that this man knows my schedule and has targeted me for some reason, but I'm so lucky that today of all days, I was not home alone. I was visiting my grandmother's house up in the cold northern Norway. I've always had weird feelings while staying there. Always felt like I was being watched at all times. Just a constant feeling of unease, I guess. Especially on the second floor where me and my little sister were staying. Upstairs is 2 rooms, and I slept in the closest room to the staircase and my sister had the adjacent room. The house is fairly old and is rather noisy, often getting woken up at night by my sister walking past my room to go to the bathroom, which is downstairs. My grandmother has struggled for a long time with her sleep too. She always wakes up at like 3 in the morning every night. She has claimed that there is activity around the house, the classic sort of doors opening and closing, sounds of footsteps, and the feeling that you're not alone. Anyway, it was around 2 or 3 in the morning, and I just couldn't sleep that night. I was basically just rolling around in my bed and ended up laying in my bed staring at the wall. The room started to feel much colder than usual, and something that happened next still gives me chills to this day. I heard a loud, raspy breath right behind me, like someone was laying in the bed right behind me, breathing heavily. It sounded like someone who was really sick, sort of struggling to breathe, I think. I even felt air brush over the back of my neck, and I completely froze. I was terrified. The breathing lasted for several seconds too, but man, it felt like a lot longer than that. I started to count to 5 before I would turn around to see if anything was behind me, and when I did, there was nothing. The room was left in an eerie silence. My heart was pounding so fast and hard that it felt like it was about to jump out of my throat, and I was staring at the door almost like expecting it to open, and it did. While staring at the door, I see the door handle go down slowly and the door creaking open. It's hard for me to explain what I felt at that moment, but it was overwhelming, and I managed to leap out of the bed and move out into the hallway to try and find any explanation of what happened. But I saw nothing and heard nothing. The windows were all closed too, so I just really couldn't find an explanation for how it happened. And man, it felt like I sat in that bed for days that night. But it was only a few hours before dawn, and when morning finally arrived, I went downstairs and sat myself down in the living room. My sister and grandmother were in the kitchen, and I overheard my sister telling my grandmother something. That around 2 or 3 in the morning, she was woken up by a loud raspy breathing in her room too. When I overheard that, it gave me instant chills to the bones and made me super terrified to be in that house. Me and my sister, we used to visit my grandmother every year, but it's been a long time now since I managed to get myself to visit my grandmother again after that. This event happened when I was 16 years old, and I'm actually 24 now. And I just, for the life of me, can't make myself go back there just yet. I am planning to go there next year. My grandmother is having a hard time lately, so hopefully I can visit her before it's too late, I guess, but maybe I'll get new experiences to share with you guys if I do go back there. Not that I want them again. Anyway, thanks for listening to my experience. It's something that I'll never forget, and I just felt like sharing it with everyone here. I hope my English wasn't too bad, but since it's not my first language, I struggle a bit. Anyway, like I said, thanks for listening, and if I do go back there, I'll be sure to send you guys the stories if anything happens, that is. I'm 41 and male, and in my early childhood, my family and I lived in an old 2-story farmhouse in rural Illinois. The first time that I saw it too, I remember getting up early to watch Saturday morning cartoons. As I started down the stairs, a dark silhouette that was vaguely man-shaped passed by the bottom of the stairs. It had the look of sort of oily, blackish grey smoke. I know that sounds weird, but that's the best way that I can describe it. No eyes or features, just the loose shape of a man. Frightened, I ran back to my room and hid under the covers until I fell back asleep. When I woke up, I tried going downstairs again, but this time it was on the stairs coming up. Again, I ran and hid in my bed, but this time it followed me into my room. I remember that to look at it, it was a bit like being drawn into it, and just froze in fear. I must have passed out or something because I don't remember what happened after that, and I got a good look at it too. It definitely was not a pleasant experience, and I would not recommend. Now, I can't imagine not having told my parents about the black ghost, but they just must not have believed me because At no point in any of this did any adult do anything about it or even acknowledge it, because years later, when I was in my 30s, I asked my mum if she remembered me talking about it, and she didn't. It went from that first encounter when I was maybe 5 or 6, up until we moved out of that house when I was 9 as well. I do wonder how someone could miss the fact that their kid is spooked the heck out all the time. And I mean, for years, if I was out in the yard playing by myself, there was a good chance the shadow was going to mess me up that day. It would just be behind me all of a sudden. If I turned around and looked behind me, it would be there. It would not often wander into my field of vision, and I had to look at it. It did things to get my attention even, like throwing sand or making noise. Sometimes it even spoke, but not like with a voice. I just kind of knew what it was saying. It's hard to explain, but I would speak to it when I knew it was behind me. I stopped doing that when I asked who it was, because the shadow told me that it was me. I didn't like that at the time. All but once these incidents happened in broad daylight. Once I was looking at the window and saw it come out of the barn at night. Only on one occasion did it appear at night, and that was when I was looking at the window and saw it coming out of the barn. Thankfully, all the shadow incidences stopped when we moved from that house. But I sometimes consider going back and trying to make contact again, just to see what the heck it wanted. So my family is from rural Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Some people live in town and others live by cornfields. The town was always quirky but spooky, and there were tons of stories like a Native American guy killed a man and stuffed him in a tree log, a witch cursed the town because they didn't accept her. There was a Mormon home outside of town that housed the founder for a few months. It was rumored someone tarred one of his followers and left him to die or something, but anyways, when I was 8, we moved into town from the country. I didn't feel anything at first, but I always got bad feelings and would run past the front room of the house. Lights would flicker, things would go missing, and well, my mum is very in tune to her surroundings and definitely has a gift to see things that are not there. And my family, they began seeing a little boy and a girl that would run around and play dressed in like 19th century clothes. But they would wave to people and run up and down the stairs. There was a man who smoked cigars and a lady in red. The little boy once came to my mum and pointed behind her TV to let her know that my brother's epilepsy medicine was behind it. I also want to note too that we lived behind an old 19th century cemetery that was, well, really creepy. So, our family went through some hard times living there. A lot of fights between my parents. My brother was busy partying, which made things worse. And I eventually developed a really big drug problem. Mental health was a serious issue in our home, and I'm not saying it's the ghost's fault, but it was odd. Anyway, we moved out after 10 years of living in that home, and that was 10 years ago now, and I still have creepy dreams about living in that house. People coming and going and just awful things happening there. Does anyone else have dreams of a childhood home that housed some really spooky, otherworldly things? I feel like a part of me is stuck there, but I don't know how to explain it. I really hope that someone can give me some insight though, because, well, that would be really helpful. As part of my university degree, I went to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico to do field surveys in various parts of the rainforest. We traveled across several sites looking at plants, animals, and doing a bunch of tests and stuff. This one site in particular was a sectioned off part of the rainforest, about 2 miles in diameter, that was semi-managed by the government. We went there once in the day, just walked around the site, did our tests, and then went back to the hotel. The rest of the day we were allowed to relax and study our notes, and then in the evening we headed back there to study the nightlife in the rainforest. So we arrived at the site, unpacked our gear, paired up with our accountability buddy and groups and stuff, and then went into the forest. We had 1 torch per group, so a lot of us used the torches on our phones to see where we were going. We walked around the same route as we had in the day, and I was vigilant in checking my phone and its battery because I was terrified of getting lost in the dark in this rainforest. We were just over halfway, I would say, with the loop around the site, and I was sitting comfortably at around 80% battery as I had the foresight of fully charging before heading out. But then, nothing. The last thing I remembered was admiring the reflection of the eyes of the crocodiles, intently keeping watch over our group. Then, when I came back to, I was on the other side of one of the villages that we had seen earlier in the day, alone. My phone was now at 1% battery. I was completely separated from my group, and I remember just staring out into this old abandoned hut with the dim light of my phone. Well, I immediately started to panic before I heard the laughter from another group on the opposite side of this small village about 50 feet away, so I rushed over and formed up with them. When I eventually reconnected with my group, they were worried and said that I was walking along, not saying anything, and then when we reached the village, they just lost sight of me. Now, I've tried to be as rational as I can thinking about this experience. I mean, I was tired, getting used to a new climate and arguably not as hydrated as I should have been, which could obviously play several large roles. However, it is important to note that I have a pretty good memory, as that's how I've learned to study, and to completely forget what would have been a 40-minute walk is just really unlike me. Thinking back on the event, I still get chills, and the more I try to rationalize it, the more I feel like something unexplainable happened that night. My only comfort really is that, apart from the fear of being abandoned in the rainforest at night, I never felt threatened or in danger or anything. At least, that's what I think. So, mimics. Well, I think that's the right word for what it is. But I've also seen people call similar experiences doppelgangers, so maybe that's the right term. In any case, my grandma's house has had some really weird going on since before I was born. The mysterious ringing phones in the basement, TVs and VCRs with minds of their own, bassinets that rocked by themselves. You name it, it's pretty much happened there. Anyway, it seems that one of them may be a mimic. So my grandfather had a job that would take him out of town at times. On at least 2 separate occasions while he was gone, my grandma and uncle saw him walk down a hallway and out of sight. They thought that maybe he could have come home without them noticing, but his car wasn't in the driveway either time, and he came home later and insisted that he hadn't been home. My mother also claimed that she used to talk to her deceased grandmother at night sometimes, and it scared her because she knew that logically it just wasn't right, but it was her grandmother, so she felt safer about it. Knowing about mimics now, it probably wasn't her grandmother though, and that's pretty terrifying. So, now to my own personal experience. So my sister and I used to spend weekends at my grandmother's house when we were younger, through high school even. We all slept in her bed, and my grandma would make us bacon and hot cocoa for breakfast in the mornings. It was a really nice time. But I woke up one morning. I was still in a state of sort of half-awareness. I opened my eyes and I saw my grandmother leaning in her bedroom doorway, just looking at me. I figured that she must have just come up to see if I was awake yet. But then she leaned backwards out of the doorway and out of sight. And something about the way that she moved just wasn't quite right. That's when I also realized that I smelled and heard bacon cooking downstairs. And it struck me as really odd that she would walk away from the bacon while it was on the stove still. She was in her 70s at this time, and though she got around well for her age, taking the stairs was still a bit of a task and took some time for her. It didn't make any sense that she would risk burning food on the stove just to come upstairs and look at me. I mean, she could have just yelled up at me to see if I was up. Anyway, I called out to her to ask if she was upstairs. From where I was, I could see out the bedroom door and down the stairs, and she walked from the kitchen to the bottom of the stairs and said no, she was making bacon. I sort of freaked a little bit, got out of bed, and I just booked it downstairs. My sister was already awake and downstairs with my grandma, which is why she was already making bacon before I was up. And both of them said that she hadn't been upstairs, so I told them what happened. That's when my grandma told us the stories that I told above about seeing my grandpa when he couldn't have been there and stuff like that. So yeah, I've been a little bit scared of my grandma's house ever since then, and I really don't like staying there. So just before Christmas, my girlfriend and I had gone to visit her mother. Her name is Jill, and she had recently separated from someone who we all pretty much perceived as extremely negative and toxic. Nobody was sad to see him leave. Shortly after we arrived, I went upstairs in the home to use the washroom, when all of a sudden I had this overwhelming sense of fear and all the hairs on my whole body just stood up. It really creeped me out, and as a 33-year-old man, I kept telling myself that I was just acting crazy. But it was like I could feel eyes on me from all of the bedrooms just staring. Well, not long after that, I started feeling very nauseated and developed a really bad headache. And then I also started hearing footsteps upstairs, and I was really starting to question my sanity. But obviously I kept all of this to myself. My girlfriend eventually started complaining of a headache and nausea as well, and it was at that point that I knew something was wrong. But I wasn't about to ruin the evening by suggesting that something paranormal was going on in the house. To be honest too, my first inclination was actually carbon monoxide, but Jill was absolutely fine, and I could also see that the devices were functioning properly. Well, we left Jill's and proceeded on our way home when I told my girlfriend that I was feeling ill inside that home, and then she told me that she was hearing some really strange noises coming from upstairs. I was trying to stay as calm as possible given the situation, and I didn't want to upset my girlfriend. Jill had been involved in a series of unexplained accidents leading up to this night though, which included little things like tripping over things frequently to big things like falling off of a ladder outside. But the strange thing is that she claims that she didn't fall and that, instead, the ladder just kicked out from underneath her. We brought this to Jill's attention the following day, where she advised us that she had no idea but was very freaked out and proceeded to smudge the house. The girlfriend went back a few days later and claims that she was still very freaked out and unsettled in the home. A few days later, a friend of Jill's walked her through various methods of cleansing the home. I haven't been back since, but the girlfriend has been and says that it doesn't feel as unsettling as before, but is still a little bit unsure. But I don't know, do any of you guys have a similar experience or perhaps know what this could be? I'm getting pretty worked up even just talking about it. It was a very unsettling night, and I would like to try and find a solution to whatever this is.